Nowadays, we think that immoderate drinking is a sign of weakness. However, back in the 1800s, it was often considered to be something between a neutral trait and, in certain circles, a proof of hardiness. A popular expression on the subject was three-bottle man. It described a man who could consume 3 bottles of port throughout one day and remain on his feet. Again, it was not necessarily a derogatory expression. It was indeed not unusual to have several dinner guests like that at one table. Strong port was one of the most popular drinks of choice for Regency men. It used to be different. Earlier in the 18th century, they preferred light wines and claret. However, after the 7 Years' War, the blame for the country's poor performance in the conflict was laid at the feet of the gentleman's quote unquote effeminate and quote unquote Frenchified drinking habits. No, it was not blamed on alcohol consumption per se. The problem, according to the writers of the day, was that the consumption in question was not masculine enough. So the gentlemen set out to prove how manly they were, and that's where the port came in. Due to the drink's popularity, plenty of people ended up trying to play foul with its quality for the sake of profit. Quite often, port was adulterated by raisin wines or cheap Spanish wine that had the nickname of Bollock's blood. Even worse, some just used berry dye for the same purposes. However, even good port had to be fined or clarified before you can drink it. There was a great range of things used for that purpose. Some were mundane enough, like eggs, salt, or skimmed milk. Some were weirder, like oyster shells, alabaster, dry sand, or my favorite option because of how elegant it sounds, powdered marble. Henceforth, claret, once a favorite of both sexes, was usually only served to women, and that in special claret cups. Though I do have to say, some Regency ladies were far from the Victorian ideals of propriety and sobriety, too. A number of them drank fortified wines such as Madeira. Say you didn't like port and actually preferred Scotch whiskey. Then, well, you were in a bind because during the war with France, and most of the Regency period was consumed by a war with France, taxes and regulations made trading in good Highland whiskey very difficult. Naturally, that did not mean that the trade stopped. The drinking most certainly had no intention of stopping. The solution was obvious: smuggling. Whiskey smuggling for the money it consumers became quite endemic. Indeed, it became such a lucrative enterprise that smugglers even started to travel in large paramilitary bands, sometimes disguised as a squad of soldiers or even preceded by pipers. The methods were quite ingenious. If you are interested, I can do a whole post of the tales of Regency whiskey smuggling one day. I need to explain here that buying from smugglers, whatever exactly you were buying, was not actually some rare and shadowy offense committed in dark alleyways. Take the famous parson James Woodford, the renowned diarist, who was, well, a parson. He led a quiet life and was utterly foreign to any concept of either skullduggery or swashbuckling. However, at one point on one late evening, he noted in his journal, and quite nonchalantly at that he just had a rendezvous with a smuggler to replenish his supplies. Granted, the good parson, being both a sober and sober minded person, was merely buying his tea, which is always a safer choice.